Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Elmore, co-chair of the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics, an independent leadership group with a legacy of influencing policies that prioritize college athletes' education, health, safety, and success. We're here today to announce key findings from a public opinion survey recently conducted by Elon University poll and the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics. The poll was conducted a month after a landmark legal settlement that permits Division I athletics programs, for the first time, to share revenue with athletes and compensate them for the value of their names, images, and likenesses, or, as we know it, NIL. This is the first comprehensive national poll on these and other major college sports issues since the House settlement terms were approved. During this period of historic change, college athletics is drawing unprecedented attention at the federal level. The SCORE Act, which aims to codify that college athletes are not employees and calls for the creation of federal standards for NIL deals, was approved in two committees of the U.S. House of Representatives before its 2025 summer recess. Then, on July 24, just a day after the House recessed, President Trump issued the, quote, Saving College Sports, unquote, executive order directing the development of new federal policies related to college sports. Now, before we turn to the findings, let me emphasize that the results of this public opinion poll are a timely and invaluable resource to lawmakers and leaders in Division I athletics as they shape policies and legislation over the next several months. It's important to know that the public overwhelmingly supports keeping college sports connected to its academic mission, even with the historic shifts on other issues like college athlete compensation. I'm joined today by Director of Elon University Poll and Professor of Political Science and Public Policy, Jason Husser, Knight Commission CEO Amy Privette Perko, and my fellow commissioner, Beth, Brooke. Now, at this time, I will turn it over to Jason to discuss survey methodology and a few notable observations about the survey results. Jason?
Thank you, Lynn. Well, as Lynn noted, the survey was developed by the Knight Commission and the Elon University poll. It was fielded by the international marketing and polling firm YouGov as an online web-based survey. It was self-administered with online panels between July 7th and July 11th. YouGov surveyed 1,671 U.S. adults over 18. These respondents were then matched down to a nationally representative sample of 1,500 people to produce the final data set. As we review these results, keep in mind there's a margin of error to all surveys, and the margin of error for this poll is plus or minus 2.9%. Now, before we get into the details of the results, I want to emphasize a key finding that stands out across my decade of leading the Elon University poll. You'll see across many questions, there were a high number of unsure responses. This is not surprising in a time of great change and uncertainty in college sports. It's clear to me that many people are still trying to understand new rules on athlete compensation, transfers, conference realignments, and other issues. Many people who don't follow college sports closely are still learning about the new environment and forming their opinions based on what they read and hear about. That's why we see much more definite views among college sports fans and much more uncertainty among casual observers. Now, as we turn to the key findings, I'll provide a brief overview about the respondents and their interest in college sports. We asked respondents about their level of interest in the nation's sports landscape. Among all respondents, 68% expressed at least some interest in professional sports, compared with 67% who said they had some interest in the Olympics, 54% who had some interest in other competitive sports, and 52% who said they had at least some interest in college sports. As we get into detailed findings throughout this survey, you'll see data that reflects those interested in college sports often have stronger views than the American public. Next up, you'll hear from Knight Commission CEO Amy Privette Perko to discuss key findings from this national public opinion poll.
Thank you, Jason. And thank you to Elon University poll for partnering to conduct this survey. It's important to note we will leave time for media Q&A at the end of the session. For media members, Please identify your outlet as you place questions in the Q&A function at any time during this presentation. And now to the key findings. The focus of this slide is the importance of academics. As Lynn noted, there's overwhelming public support from all demographics and interest groups for maintaining an academic emphasis in college sports. More than 80% of Americans said it was extremely or very important for athletes to be enrolled and taking classes as full-time students at their institutions and for those athletes to graduate. These two responses were the highest percentage of consensus among all respondents. This further emphasizes the importance of keeping college sports tethered to its academic mission. Additionally, nearly 3/4 of Americans support the existing rule requiring teams to be on track to graduate at least half their athletes to remain eligible for postseason competition. Moving next to a timely and overarching topic regarding oversight, the public was asked who should regulate the business of college sports. The survey revealed no public consensus on this question. The NCAA remains the top choice, but with only 35% support, followed by governing bodies that regulate specific sports at 25%. Notably, the third most popular choice was none of these, while the least popular choice was the federal government at 6%. As a reminder, this poll was conducted prior to the president's executive order and the SCORE Act passing in 2 House committees. On the subject of legislation, most Americans are either skeptical or unsure whether Congress should enact legislation to regulate college sports. To review the findings on this question, I first want to orient you to what you're seeing on this slide and what you will see on other slides detailing the results throughout this presentation. The all respondents group is shown above the line. This group includes all U.S. adults, including people who have no interest in sports and no interest in college sports. And below the line, we put a microscope on select populations of people within the all respondents group. Those select groups are those very or moderately interested in college sports, former college athletes and their families, college football fans, and college basketball fans. Each of these select groups are not mutually exclusive. Obviously, the numbers for the select groups below the line do not add up to the numbers shown in the all respondents group because we are not showing breakout data for the separate group of respondents not interested in college sports. As you can see in response to this question, within the general public, only 36% supported the creation of federal legislation to supersede state laws and to allow the NCAA to enact uniform nationwide rules, while 26% were opposed and 39% were unsure. However, support for new federal legislation was much higher among those respondents who identified as being interested in college sports, with 54% favoring national laws compared with 24% who oppose such legislation. This is a good place to reemphasize that the responses of those not interested in college sports are included in the top all respondents bar. I want to welcome Knight Commission member Beth Brooke to discuss key findings related to collegiate Olympic sports and opportunities for female athletes. Beth?
Thank you, Amy. With Division I college sports funding being stretched by the pressure to successfully compete and to fund new athlete compensation schemes, schools are reconsidering the extent of their support for sports that do not generate significant revenue, generally referred to as collegiate Olympic sports. Over the past 10 months, some Division I schools have announced that they're either dropping teams or reducing funding in these sports as the schools try to adjust to the new financial environment. The survey asked the American public how important it is for Division I universities to offer opportunities for students to participate in varsity sports other than those that are tied to generating revenues, like football and basketball. As highlighted here, nearly 7 in 10 Americans said it's moderately to extremely important for universities to offer these collegiate Olympic sports. Among those interested in college sports, the support was even higher, with more than 9 in 10 Americans saying that these varsity collegiate sports opportunities beyond football and basketball are important. Now, there may be many reasons that Americans believe these sports are important, from understanding the development opportunities that participation provides to athletes, all the way to just being fans of these specific sports. In the survey, we probed deeper into one aspect of the importance of these sports. We asked specifically about their relevance to Team USA's success in the Olympics. As you see here, nearly all of the respondents who are interested in college sports believe that collegiate Olympic sports are important to the success of Team USA in the Olympics. And the real-life data suggests that the public opinion is correct. The United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee reported that at last year's Summer Paris Games, 75% of Team USA athletes competed in U.S. college sports, and 84% of our U.S. medals were earned by U.S. collegiate athletes. The importance of the collegiate sports system to the Olympic movement's success in the United States is undeniable, and the survey confirms that the public recognizes that. More broadly, the success of Team USA in the Olympics is important to a great majority of Americans, with 76% saying that it is moderately to extremely important that Team USA succeeds in the Olympics. So, the survey suggests that the success of Team USA in the Olympics is important to people, and the collegiate system to which those athletes train and compete is important to that Team USA success. It's encouraging to see such broad public support for the collegiate Olympic sports and the role that they play in achieving Team USA Olympic success. But acknowledging the importance of these sports is only half the battle. Facing the potential threat of these sports being dropped or defunded, as I mentioned earlier, for financial reasons, now is the time for both Division I leaders and lawmakers to recognize the urgent need to continue investing in these sports at the collegiate level and to create new mechanisms to make sure that that investment is sufficient and robust. The survey also explored openness to federal funding directly from the government for collegiate Olympic sports. While Americans strongly support the importance of Team USA's success in the Olympics, as I said before, there's a surprising lack of knowledge about the funding that exists today that fuel the development of our U.S. Olympic athletes. More than 8 in 10 Americans think that the United States government provides direct funding for Team USA development programs. But in fact, it does not. The federal government provides not $1 of direct support. As the slide shows, only 19% of the respondents got that right. However, when we asked about using federal funds to help finance college sports programs to develop U.S. national team members, nearly half of the Americans supported the idea. So, when you put those two thoughts together, most think that the federal government is providing some degree of direct support today, and they seem to be okay with that. The survey tested one example of something that could be done to generate funds. It asked about enacting a fee or federal tax on sports gambling operators to create a national fund to support collegiate Olympic sports. 53% of Americans supported this idea. compared to 22% who opposed it. Interestingly, a 0.25%, a quarter of a percent federal fee already exists today on sports gambling operators. It generates nearly $400 million each year, but the revenue is not earmarked to be specifically used for anything. With the exploding interest in women's sports, it was important for the survey to explore that. Many women's sports fall into the collegiate Olympic sports category. The survey asked directly about women's sports and the equitable opportunities that Title IX requires schools to provide. As this slide highlights, 39% of Americans believe that schools have not gone far enough in providing female athletes with equitable opportunities, compared with 27% who said that the schools have been about right. More than a quarter of the respondents were unsure, and only 7% said schools have gone too far in providing equitable opportunities to female athletes. In looking at the demographic breakdown, women were more likely than men to say that schools have not gone far enough in providing equitable opportunities to female athletes. Now, let me turn it back to Amy for some more interesting survey insights. She's going to provide key survey findings on athlete employment status and compensation, and the public's reaction to the many changes that are occurring today in Division I. Amy?
Thank you, Beth. The survey also asked about classifying athletes as employees. We will show these results as a pie chart to visually emphasize the mixed results on this question. The first question asked about whether athletes in revenue-producing sports should be classified as employees. In the pie chart, those saying yes, as seen in black, were 30%, and saying no were 36%, represented in blue. And 34% of Americans responded as unsure, as seen in gray. Not shown on this slide, but found in the report, is that former college athletes and their families were more likely to support employee classification for this group of athletes, with 41% of them taking that view. The second question was different and asked about whether all college athletes should be classified as employees, regardless of their sports revenue generation. 21% said yes to employee classification for all college athletes, and those opposed was higher at 43%, with a little more than a third as unsure. As these charts show, the public views are mixed on these questions, but there was more opposition to classifying athletes in all sports as employees as compared to just athletes in revenue-producing sports. The American public is much more receptive to universities negotiating with college athletes on pay, rights, and responsibilities, much in the way that pro sports leagues do with players' unions. Overall, 41% of Americans supported athlete negotiations with their schools, compared with 30% who opposed that idea. Among those interested in college sports, 52% favored player negotiations. Support for player negotiations was similar for former college athletes and their families, and college football fans, with 50% holding that view. And even higher among college basketball fans, with 57% expressing support. The next two findings relate to athlete NIL compensation and other financial payments that can now be directly provided by universities to individual athletes, in addition to athletic scholarships. Americans were asked about their views on the appropriate compensation limits, if any, for these direct university payments. Responses varied widely. While 24% believed an athlete should receive nothing beyond an athletic scholarship, a plurality of Americans, at 45%, supported the idea of athletes receiving at least some compensation beyond their athletic scholarships. It's important to note that current rules under the new settlement terms do not have team or individual compensation limits, only an institutional cap for total athlete compensation across all sports. Americans had definite opinions about the funding source for this new athlete compensation from universities. They heavily favored raising money from private and corporate support and media contracts, and there was little support for increasing student tuition and fees and dropping non-revenue sports to help fund new payments. The next question asked about the collective impact of recent changes in Division I, including the transfer portal, name, image, and likeness compensation, and conference realignments. Americans were divided and uncertain in their assessments. The predominant response from the public was that half of Americans considered the impact neither positive nor negative, or were unsure about the impact. To Jason's earlier observation, the survey responses tell us that many people do not fully understand the current college sports environment or are undecided in what they think. Current transfer rules and the higher rate of transfers over the past several years has been a topic in recent news. The last finding we will review relates to this topic. Americans were asked about the transfer rules that allow Division I college athletes to move between schools as often as they choose without penalty and to be immediately eligible at their new schools. Again, Americans were mixed in their views. Overall, 38% of Americans opposed the new transfer policy, compared with 36% who supported it. Among those interested in college sports, 49% supported the transfer rules and 43% opposed them. This concludes our review of key findings. You can access the full report at this QR code or through the bit.ly link provided on the screen. The full report includes other topics such as the benefits of college sports, views on the college football playoff and FBS football governance, college coach credentialing, athletes' health and safety, and sports gambling. To sum up our key takeaway, Americans show lots of uncertainty about the seismic shifts in Division I college sports, but they are certain about two things: educational mission matters, and athletic participation opportunities should not be limited to only revenue-producing sports. Prioritizing those goals has long been a cornerstone of the Knight Commission's work, and it is encouraging to see a clear public sentiment on these issues. One important note for Division I leaders, specifically presidents, athletic directors, senior women administrators, and faculty athletic representatives. Our commission and Elon University poll are also conducting a Division I leaders survey on similar issues. Division I leaders, please check all of your email inboxes, including spam, as the survey was sent last week by Elon University poll. If you didn't receive or see the survey, you can contact us by email at info@knightcommission.org. We expect to release those results in early October. At this time, I will ask Knight Commission consultant Peyton Barish to moderate any media questions, and I'll ask my colleagues Beth, Jason, and Lynn to join me in responding to any questions.
Thanks, Amy. If you are a member of the media and would like to ask a question, you can type it into the Q&A function below. Please provide your name and media outlet. We will try to get to as many questions as time permits, but if we don't answer yours, refer to the press release for media contacts. While we give time for media members to input their questions, I'd like to start with a question to Jason. Can you talk about how representative this survey is to the national population?
Sure, thanks, Peyton. That's really a key question for any survey because these numbers need to represent the population of interest. In this case, we wanted to know what Americans overall thought. And the great thing about doing surveys in the United States is we have really great data from the U.S. Census. And so YouGov did a what's called a modeled frame of the U.S. based on the American Community Survey by the Census, public use microdata files, public voter records, the 2020 current population survey, and other voter registration information. At the end, this survey matches U.S. Census and other forms of data on several categories, including age, gender, race, ethnicity, years of education, region of the country, and home ownership. And there was further things done to make sure that our results really are going to be very close to what the U.S. as a whole would think within a 3-point margin of error.
Awesome. Thanks for such a detailed response. Amy, question for you. How do you expect this survey to make an impact on the ongoing discussion around legislation and the future of collegiate athletics?
Well, thanks, Peyton. First I want to emphasize that when we conducted this survey, we didn't know how the results would turn out, of course. And from our perspective, it's very encouraging that the public showed clear and strong support for two things: the connection between college sports and the educational mission matters, and the importance of all sports, particularly sports other than those that produce significant revenue like football and basketball. And the commission's work has been to emphasize those two things, the educational mission and the value of opportunity. So we look forward to continuing to collaborate with leaders about those key and core values.
Thank you. Another question for you. Obviously, this survey pretty deeply explored Olympic sports and broad-based opportunities. Is the Knight Commission sharing this survey with the USOPC and working closely with them to develop solutions?
Yeah, I'll take that first, and then I'll turn to my colleague Beth if she wants to add anything in response. I will say at the start of this year, the commission identified as a priority to work with other leaders to help preserve opportunities, understanding that we're moving into this new era of Division I college sports, and there'll have to be new ways of financing opportunities. And so what we did in terms of the commission is form a task force to collaborate with other leaders, Coaches Association groups, USOPC, those that share the same goals of really prioritizing opportunity. And that work was to look for new solutions and to continue to offer these elite competitive experiences. Beth Brooke is co-chairing that task force with Bob Bowlesby. And as I noted, we've been collaborating with USOPC and Collegiate Coaching Association groups like ABCA, led by Jamie Gordon, the Wrestling Coaches Association, led by Mike Moyer, Swimming and Diving, led by Samantha Barani, just to give some examples. And so obviously in the survey, several questions tested these potential new solutions and new financing opportunities. Beth, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. As co-chair of the task force, it's been great to work with the stakeholders. The question asked about the USOPC, they're one of the key stakeholders in that group. Just collecting a lot of ideas from a lot of people, and we've received some very, very interesting ones, which some of which were explored in the survey. I would say my takeaway from the survey is that there's a real understanding and desire and need for the existence of the task force, which is exploring potential proposals or things that could be helpful in this space. We talked about in the survey the importance of the success of Team USA and the importance of the collegiate Olympic sports system to train those Team USA athletes. And so the survey just absolutely confirms the importance of the work that's dedicated toward preserving broad-based opportunities in sport.
Thank you both for those great answers. We have a media question from, and I apologize if I butcher your last name, Mark Singulace at the Albany Times-Union. And this one, I think, probably good for Jason to start with an answer. He asks, is there any way of knowing whether fans of high major schools might have different responses to these poll questions than the fans of mid-major schools?
It's a great question. It makes me wish right now that we had included a question of what's your favorite college sports team, because we'd be able to code that. We did not ask that question about what's your favorite team. And so what we'd have to do to try to get some purchase on that would be to speculate about what characteristics we did measure that may correlate to being a fan of a high major school versus a mid-major. So I don't have that on the fly, but the short answer is we don't have a good way of knowing. But I would turn that to my colleagues immersed in college sports if they have a sense of that, because obviously these impacts differ depending upon the budgets of the athletic programs.
Right. Thanks, Jason. And obviously we did not get into that kind of detail in the demographic question. I will, use that question as an opportunity again to emphasize that we are conducting a D1 leader survey that breaks out those D1 leaders by competitive grouping, because some D1 leaders have different views on these questions, and obviously that group of Division I leaders are the leaders that are most connected with all of these issues on campus. So again, we encourage presidents, ADs, SWAs, senior women administrators, and faculty athletic representatives to respond to that survey.
Awesome. Thank you both for such great answers. This next question comes from Matt Brown, who writes the newsletter Extra Points. He says, I'm not sure if there's been much other polling on what Americans feel about employment, potential federal legislative action, etc. Do you have any sense about how public attitudes may have shifted over the last few months related to these issues?
I'll jump in first, but Jason, I'd like you to respond to this as well. I would say, Matt, thanks for that question. And, we really need to take a step back too and analyze ourselves what was done. We looked at some of the polling on employment, compensation issues, but most of the polling was done actually prior to the House settlement terms advancing, and then the House settlement terms obviously being approved on June the 6th. So this is the first public opinion poll that's been done since the conclusion of the House settlement. But I think, it would be informative, obviously, to go back and look at those, pre-House settlement polling that may have been done on those questions.
And we take this as one of those questions that did have a fairly high number of unsure responses. I don't know that we would see any change based on what's been going on in the last couple of months. Will probably lead to changes once people start hearing stories. There are stories about how different universities, colleges have interacted with these changes, how compensation levels have made a difference on individual players' lives, individual teams. Then I think that will start driving what people think, particularly what sports fans who are tuned in think.
Awesome question, and thank you guys both for those answers. Next question comes from Lois Elfman from the Amsterdam News. Does anybody on this panel have any comments on the lack of Title IX consideration in the SCORE Act?
I'll jump in on that. Obviously, we as well as other groups are analyzing the SCORE Act, and we expect, continued debate on the SCORE Act when Congress comes back in session, when the House comes back in session in September. And, I will note that we were encouraged by very specific language in the president's executive order that specifically called out the need to preserve and enhance women's sports opportunities and opportunities in those sports, outside of the revenue producing sports. So there's a recognition that I think on behalf of many leaders that will be working collaboratively moving forward to shape any legislation that, and we saw it in the public opinion poll. The public does not want to see any steps backwards as it relates to opportunities for collegiate female athletes, as well as the public is strongly supportive of the collegiate Olympic sports and those sports, outside the revenue producing sports. So particularly we saw a very specific question in the public opinion poll about equitable opportunities for women. And we saw that 39% of Americans still feel that colleges haven't gone far enough in providing those equitable opportunities. So again, the American public says there's still work to do. So certainly the public doesn't want to see any steps backwards.
The question is a good one, and it's one that, likewise is asked around the absence of Title IX being addressed in the House settlement, not being addressed in SCORE Act. As Amy mentioned, it was addressed in the executive order, or at least mentioned. So I think the question is appropriate and continues to be asked.
It's clearly going to be a huge issue as college athletics continues to develop in this new era. Question for Amy from Steve Parker. He says, I understand most people want athletes to get a degree. Given their time limitations, are a large number of athletes getting the degree they want, or are they forced to get degrees that fit their busy schedule?
Well, thanks for that question, Steve. And before I answer it, I will say to any other media on the call, if you have a question, I think we're nearing the time for last question, so you can go ahead and put a question in the Q&A. We may have time for one more or so. But back to Steve's question. With regard to academics, I think one of the real enhancements of the past several years, and this is, an example of a policy that the commission pushed for over time, and the NCAA put in some requirements for Division I schools to provide degree completion funds for college athletes. And so again, the funding mechanism to support those athletes through the degree completion has been a great improvement. And in fact, that's something that you see reflected in the SCORE Act as well, trying to codify those degree completion assistance. But in terms of the choices that athletes make, I think that's something that's best answered on campus and obviously in the individual lives of each college athlete with regard to the choices that they're making.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. I think now we're going to close. We have one other question actually from Lois Elfman from the Amsterdam News, who asks, in a previous press release from the Knight Commission, the executive director of USA Track and Field suggested developing alternative funding to the traditional routes. What do you think some of those can entail?
Well, I'll start with trying to answer that. And thanks for the question, Lois. And again, as mentioned in the question, we did have our public meeting, the commission's public meeting in May, included several leaders with collegiate Olympic sports, and including the CEO of USA Track and Field and Bubba Cunningham, the AD at North Carolina. And that discussion can be found on the Knight Commission's website, knightcommission.org, where a number of different solutions were offered by Max Siegel, who's the CEO of Track and Field, as well as other leaders. So again, in terms of, I don't think with any of these solutions that have been proposed, whether they've come from Track and Field or from ABCA with volleyball, I think what we've been trying to do as a commission is to surface all the ideas and to see where there can be support and what's actually doable. One example of the commission solution on how to, ensure that there are appropriate incentives in the college sports system for schools that are offering more opportunity in these sports than maybe some of their competitors is to make a really simple change to the NCAA annual revenue distribution, so that the incentives that are currently in the NCAA's March Madness revenue distribution shifts the current incentives given for the sport of FBS football and simply shifts those incentives over to the college football playoff. And just by making that one change, that is appropriate, since the college football playoff revenue distribution will be over $1 billion annually, and that's where the incentives are for schools that sponsor football. But just that one change with the incentives for the NCAA increases the value of the incentives for collegiate Olympic sports by $60 million a year. So that would be one simple way. The NCAA obviously sends more than $600 million to Division I schools every year for a lot of different reasons. And one of those reasons, and the NCAA is to be commended for this, one of those reasons is to reward schools for providing opportunities in all sports. And so what our solution says is just fix the formula that should have been fixed when the CFP started its separate distribution, and then that increases the value of the incentives those schools receive from what is now, around $200 million a year, but it would increase the value of the collegiate Olympic sports within that distribution by $60 million. That's a long-winded answer to your question, Lois, but that's one solution. But we see that as one solution in a package of other solutions that all leaders are talking about. So I'll stop there if any of my colleagues want to add to that.
Well, we mentioned in the remarks, another idea that we received was this, the tax on sports gambling operators, or a fee, and that could be, the earmark could be purposed toward collegiate Olympic sports. Again, just another alternative funding source in sort of a package that Amy describes of, there is not going to be one silver bullet. There will be a package of proposals that make sense, and then probably compiled with some requirement among the schools to maintain proportionate funding for their support of collegiate Olympic sports going forward. In other words, where they are today percentage-wise, staying there, where in that percentage over time, and then appropriately, as Amy said, finding ways to help fund the growing needs for funds across the spectrum.
Thank you, Amy and Beth. This will be the last question before we close out this press conference. This comes from Noah Henderson, who writes and publishes College Front Office. If the justification for subsidizing Olympic sports is national success, how do we square that with the fact that most cuts are happening at mid-majors, while Power 5 athletes make up the majority of U.S. Olympians? In your opinion, are Olympic sports at Power 5 schools safe, or are they in jeopardy too?
I'll jump in on that question, and thank you for that question, Noah. I would say, again, from the Knight Commission's perspective, we want to make clear that we're not saying the opportunities should be preserved just for Olympic success. Certainly that's a component of what you heard today, and that was a component of what was tested in this survey. But we also, the question asked of the public that was not tied to, Olympic success was, how important is it for universities to offer these opportunities in sports other than revenue producing sports? And you saw, more than 70%, close to 78% of the public saying that it was very important. And again, from the Knight Commission perspective, the value of opportunity and what college sports provides to the development and education of young women and men in college is the reason that we have put that value on opportunity. And as it relates then to your question, with the mid-majors, there are a very small number of Division I universities that have positive net revenue. Very, very small. And the majority of Division I universities depend on student fees and institutional funding to support more than half of the athletics department's budget. So, again, not in the survey, but at least from the Knight Commission's perspective, when these opportunities are funded by the institution for providing these athletic opportunities for young women and men, is our view that they should not be just in a revenue producing sport like basketball. So hopefully that answers your question, Noah.
Thanks everyone for your excellent questions. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. As shown on the slide, you can access the full report and all data and charts through this QR code or the bit.ly link provided. Additionally, you can find the release and the report link on knightcommission.org. Thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.